Welcome to part 2 of Ben Roethlisberger Underrated. If you missed part 1, in part 1 I basically just laid out how the media has been against Ben and how that has hurt his case as an all-time great. In part 2 today, we're going to look at the statistical evidence for Ben Roethlisberger as one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. And the first way to look at stats is to look at cumulative statistics. In Roethlisberger's case, his cumulative statistics would clearly warrant him to be in the discussion of one of the greatest quarterbacks in NFL history. He's 5th in passing yardage, 8th in pass touchdowns, 6th in completions. The 3 Super Bowl appearances is tied for 8th most for a quarterback. 2 Super Bowl wins tied for 5th. His 166 wins is 5th all time, but his win percentage is actually 3rd. The reason that his cumulative wins is a little bit lower is because he didn't play as many games as some of the other quarterbacks who are ahead of him in total wins. Now, often Roethlisberger's cumulative stats are overlooked because of the generation he played in, and people say, well, everybody nowadays is putting up huge numbers, and so it diminishes the value of his numbers. There's some truth to this, and then it's somewhat people just trying to push a narrative. Those of you that follow the Steelers know that at the beginning of Roethlisberger's career, this was a run-happy football team. In Ben's first 4 years in the league, he only had 7 games where he attempted 35 or more passes. So there's definitely an argument to be made that Roethlisberger's cumulative stats could be a little bit higher had he played in a more pass-friendly offense at the start of his career. But nonetheless, he still finishes in the top 10 in passes attempted in NFL history. While we continue to look at cumulative statistics, you look at Roethlisberger's career accolades, and they are some of the most impressive in NFL history. He has the most 500-plus yard passing games in NFL history, most 450-plus yard passing games in NFL history, the most games in NFL history with a perfect passer rating, the 5th most 3,000-yard seasons, most passing touchdowns over a 2-week span, and is the only quarterback to have back-to-back playoff games with 4 or more touchdown passes. And along these lines, there are only 3 quarterbacks in NFL history with 60,000 or more passing yards and 2 or more Super Bowl victories: Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, and Ben Roethlisberger. And while his cumulative stats and career accolades are extremely impressive, those that have followed Roethlisberger's career would most likely argue that his most impressive trait was his ability to win. I believe there's a clear case to be made that Roethlisberger is the most clutch quarterback in NFL history. In the regular season, Roethlisberger is tied for 3rd for most game-winning drives and is 3rd in fourth quarter comebacks. If you include the playoffs, he moves to 2nd in game-winning drives, and he has the most wins in NFL history in games decided by 6 points or less.
That's why he's the MVP! That's why he's the GOAT! The GOAT!
Now, you might be asking how I consider him to be the most clutch when he's not first in these categories. The thing is, the quarterback that he's tied with, Drew Brees, played 80 more games than him, and then Peyton Manning and Tom Brady, who he's behind, played 20 and almost 90 more games than Roethlisberger did. Simply put, Roethlisberger just didn't have as many opportunities as those guys, or he would probably be first in both categories. Over the years, I have developed this long and excessive spreadsheet to determine which quarterbacks I believe are the greatest of all time. Now, if you're sitting there thinking that this looks like the work of a madman, you would be 100% correct, and it is over the top and unnecessary. However, it has helped me gain a new perspective on determining greatness at the quarterback position. I'm not going to sit here and bore you with how the spreadsheet works, but basically the idea is that every statistical category should be broken down on a per games played basis. This allows you to accurately compare quarterbacks who had drastically different lengths in their careers. For instance, Brett Favre played 155 more games than Steve Young. So how could you possibly look at their cumulative statistics and compare the two's careers? It really just can't be done very well. Using this idea, let's compare the careers of Ben Roethlisberger and Drew Brees. Now, if you propose to anyone in the NFL world that you think Ben Roethlisberger had a better career than Drew Brees, you would be met with serious skepticism.
You're an idiot.
However, I think the data would show that they're a lot closer than people think. When you look at the statistics, Drew Brees wins most categories. Particularly touchdowns per game, he has a huge advantage over Roethlisberger. And when you move over to the winning side of things, Roethlisberger has the advantage in every category, with the biggest advantage coming in the losing seasons category. Now, the way I looked at losing seasons was if a quarterback started at least 4 games in a year, did they win 2 out of 4? Roethlisberger has just 1 losing season coming in 2006 when he went 7-8 as a starter, to Drew Brees' 6 losing seasons. Now, to this point, I probably haven't told you anything that you didn't already know. We've been told Roethlisberger was a better winner and Brees was better statistically. Now, I can already hear the Saints fans screaming at me that Brees never got to play on a team as talented as Roethlisberger did, which is somewhat true but has really been blown out of proportion. On average, Roethlisberger had the 9th best defense in the league, and Brees had the 18th best defense in the league. So overall, Roethlisberger's teams were better, but not by as much as people will tell you. There's a side effect, however, of playing on great teams that is often overlooked. When you're playing on bad teams, you get to throw the ball more, thus helping your stats. When you're playing on good teams, you would most likely run the ball more because you have a lead. For their careers, Brees got to throw the ball 3 times a game more than Big Ben did. If you take those 3 attempts per game and multiply them by Ben's completion percentage and then his average yards per completion, etc., 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 you will end up with an adjusted passing yards per game of 280.2 for Ben and 280.9 for Brees. 0.7 yards difference.
Oh my God.
With this formula, Brees keeps a sizable lead in touchdowns per game and Roethlisberger keeps the slight edge in interceptions per game. When you factor in Roethlisberger's additional Super Bowl, less losing seasons, and a higher win percentage, and look at the tiny statistical difference between the two, it would appear that there's at least a very strong case to be made that Ben Roethlisberger had a better career than Drew Brees. Now, you can absolutely walk away from this and still believe that Drew Brees is better than Ben Roethlisberger. And that's okay, he was a phenomenal quarterback. But the point I'm trying to make here is that there's definitely an argument for Ben having a better career than Brees, and yet, if you propose that to anybody who watches the NFL, they would tell you you were crazy. Let's do this again with Ben Roethlisberger and John Elway. Roethlisberger beats Elway in every statistical category, and even if you give Elway the additional 2 attempts per game that Roethlisberger has over him, Ben still wins in every category. Now, I'm very aware that this was a different era of football, but this is a pretty sizable gap in most categories. The stats that have to do with winning are pretty even, with Elway's biggest strength being his playoff win percentage and the 5 Super Bowl appearances. Similarly to what I said with Drew Brees, if you don't believe Roethlisberger is better than John Elway, even after looking at this, that's totally fine. What I want to get rid of is this idea that those 2 quarterbacks are not on the same level. People put Elway in this elite level of quarterback play, and then Roethlisberger's in like the great tier that's below for some reason, when in reality, these quarterbacks are extremely similar. Quickly referring back to my quarterback spreadsheet, I've probably put 20 to 25 different quarterbacks into this spreadsheet, and I've come up with what I think is a clear-cut top 12. And when you look at Roethlisberger's ranks among the top 12, he's in the top 5 or top 10 in a handful of categories. And this brings me really to my main point of this entire series, which is that Ben Roethlisberger is the most underrated player in NFL history. Nobody considers him to be in that top 10 elite tier when it comes to all-time quarterback play, and it just doesn't make sense why he isn't considered there. He's got career accolades that match up with the greatest of all time. His cumulative statistics are top 10 in virtually every category, and when you break it down per game, you can see he's equal to or better than a lot of the alleged greatest quarterbacks in NFL history that most people tell you he doesn't match up against. When you look at the ability to win and all of the statistics, I think there's a case for Roethlisberger to be as high as probably 6th all time, and there's no way he should ever be lower than 12th, and yet he is ranked lower than that according to almost every alleged expert and analyst, and it's just nearly impossible to understand why. At the very minimum, I hope you walk away from this thinking Ben Roethlisberger was better than you maybe gave him credit for. Make sure to come back for part 3, as I will look at the false narrative surrounding Ben, some of the ideas like Roethlisberger was never one of the best of his generation, or it's his fault that the Steelers have not had playoff success over the last decade or so. So make sure to come back for that.